Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Innovative CFOs Agenda, Driving Efficiency with Accounts Payable Automation. As we wait for everyone to join for the next few minutes, please feel free to chat into the Zoom interface and share where you're joining from. I'm Devin Clark. I am Centeam's Director of Demand Generation, and I am joining you today from Boston, Massachusetts, which is a pretty dreary day. I think we're all here in Massachusetts with the rain, stuck with the rain. Before we dive in, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes. So number one, we are recording. If you're curious to go back and rewatch any part of this webinar, we'll send you the on-demand recording via email in the next few days. Second, please engage with the polls. It gives our speakers just an understanding of who you are and really helps guide the conversation. Additionally, if you did sign up through CPA Academy, you are required to answer the polls to earn credit. So for this session, there are 3 separate polls. There's a welcome poll with 2 questions. There's an understanding your AP environment poll where we'll have 3 questions, and then a final poll with just 1 question. So you'll need to answer all of those questions within the set of polls in order to submit your answer. So scroll down at the bottom and you can submit your answer there within Zoom. And then we are on chat and Q&A. So I encourage you to mingle with everyone else joining the session today. And if you have any questions, please use that Q&A feature in Zoom. And our team's going to do the best to answer your questions in real time or at the end of the session. So with that, I will introduce you to the speakers that we have today. We have BC Krishna, CEO and founder of Centeam, and Chris Sands, CFO of IntelliCare. BC, do you want to kick us off with a little introduction about yourself?
Sounds good. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Devin. Yesterday you were in the Berkshires. Today you're in Boston.
Traveling all over the place.
Are we doing a webinar tomorrow as well? I'm curious to know where you're going to be. Connecticut. Okay. But, where I am, which is 25 miles northwest of Boston, it is sunny. And, I think we live for these microclimates, and I look forward to spending the next hour with you guys. My name is BC Krishna. I'm the founder and CEO of Centeam. I previously was the founder and CEO of an accounts payable automation company called Mineral Tree. Spent a lot of time in the accounts payable automation universe. I have many welts on my back from those days and those journeys. And I'm very happy to also say that, my partner in crime, we used to work together, is Chris Sands. So Chris is not only a co-panelist, he's also a friend. Generally sort of, gives me a very hard time about trivial things. And I expect that to be the case today. Over to you, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to ask why you're not even smiling in your picture, so we can start there. It's kind of a tough title, but anyway, it's great to be here. As BC mentioned, we worked together, and that was actually at Mineral Tree, accounts payable automation business. So in addition to being a customer and client of AP automation companies, also had the benefit of being on the executive team of one through a scaling period. So lots of thoughts on the product as a user and from a business perspective. But currently CFO of a digital health platform called IntelliCare, which serves the labor needs of post-acute healthcare businesses, and also an accounts payable automation user here. So happy to be on the panel and looking forward to the webinar and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Chris. So just to go over quickly today's agenda, BC is going to kick us off with an overview of the rise of AP automation. We'll dive into 10 benefits of AP automation, including a little walkthrough of the Centeam solution. And at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and BC, you can go ahead and start.
Are you going to do polls or what?
Yes, we're going to start the first poll, and we're going to have it on for a while. So let me know if anyone's having issues.
Right. It seems like, in the past, we've had lots of people having lots of anxiety about not being able to answer the poll. So let's make sure that those anxieties are properly quelled. And then we will get into all of the details of what we want to talk about today. All right. So you're seeing my screen, hopefully. What should I just talk while the poll is going on, Devin? You'll sort of interrupt when the polls are complete and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, feel free to
Okay.
keep talking.
All right. So what I wanted to do was to kick off by just, look, as I said, I've had almost a decade plus 13 years of spending time in the depths of the evolution of API automation. When I started Mineral Tree, people just really didn't want to talk about API automation because guess what? Everybody, it processed invoices and made payments just perfectly fine. But many things happened. And one of the things that did happen was that, there was a quick realization that this basic everyday process, which every company at some level has to deal with, is inefficient, it's costly, it exposes businesses to control weaknesses. Things like, segregation of duties are not properly practiced everywhere. And the risk of external fraud, things like, business email compromise, can impact businesses quite a bit. A bit of trivia here is that many businesses often don't realize that their business accounts are not covered by the same regulations against electronic payment fraud as consumer accounts. And so while fraud is probably not in everybody's mind as a top of mind issue, when it does happen, it can be quite devastating. So the point simply is that, over time, and since about 2015 or so, what we've seen is a pretty significant amount of increase in the number of companies that are looking to automate the accounts payable process. And the accounts payable process, as you can see, it's just rich with benefits once you automate. It's cost, you can reduce cost, you can make it more efficient, you can reduce your control weaknesses, and of course, your risks. Chris and I did this together at Mineral Tree, and he does it now at his company. And many of you probably have some kind of API automation solution. We'll learn more about that. The point I also want to make is that in the past decade, something like about 200,000 small and mid-sized companies have automated accounts payable. This cost of these solutions has come down quite a bit. And what used to be the domain of large companies, when you look back at the history of accounts payable and accounts payable automation, much of it was really focused on invoice processing. And if you think about I often tell the story of somebody like the Mayo Clinic, right? Which processes about 125,000 invoices every month. It's unconscionable that somebody would continue to process that volume of invoices in a manual fashion. So large companies with very high invoice volumes have typically been the first to automate the invoice processing step. But as time has gone on, the capabilities of accounts payable automation solutions have become broader, they have become less expensive, and they've bolted on not only invoice processing, but also payment processing. And today, an accounts payable automation solution addresses the full end-to-end process from invoice intake to payment disbursement in one solution. And that, I think, is the reason why there's been a tremendous amount of uptake on the part of small and mid-sized businesses, in automating accounts payable. And when we say small and mid-sized businesses, we're talking about 6, 7, 8 million businesses in the United States that range in revenue from about $1 million to about $100 million, right? So it's a pretty large number of businesses that have the opportunity to do so, but haven't yet fully adopted. So that's what we feel is a pretty significant a way in which businesses can bring efficiency to this, everyday process. Chris, you're frowning like you disagree with me.
No, I don't. I don't disagree at all. No, I'm just surprised that I agree with everything you're saying, I guess. It's AP automation. I mean, I mentioned I'm now a customer a few times over, is just so necessary today. I don't think that we're probably quite yet at the stage of penetration where it's kind of table stakes for running a finance function, but I'm certain we'll be there at some point. And generally when I think about this, and you think about all of the activities in the finance function, which I think we'll talk more about how technology is driving the digitization of the finance function, this is one that is particularly ripe for automation. And so, yeah, I agree with everything you're saying and lots of thoughts, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, but this is absolutely a critical automation opportunity for all finance practitioners.
And there are a number of really great solutions out there. I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? Is that, the market for AP automation solutions has matured. In the last 10 years, we've seen a number of really good solutions out there. And not only that, I think we've also seen a lot of companies like the Institute of Financial Management, IOFM. You can search and look them up. And when you receive this deck, you can click on that benchmark studies link, and you'll see, the benchmark study that I'm about to refer to. These are folks that have done benchmark studies to see how businesses have benefited. And what I wanted to do was to share with you some of the highlights from one of the more recent benchmark studies. There's nothing like making having a really tangible approach. And we can talk all day long about, it reduces efficiency, blah, 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 blah. But I think many of you are in the finance department, and finance people like to talk about numbers. And there's nothing like, making something very tangible so that we can sort of relate the benefits of AP automation back to numbers. What I'm going to do is to actually do something, hopefully that'll work. I'm going to take us through 10 benefits, 10 tangible benefits from the study, and show you how they can be achieved. And the way I'm going to do that is somewhat self-serving, right? I'm going to show you a benefit, and I'm going to switch to the Centime AP automation solution to show you how that particular benefit can be achieved. To be clear, I'm going to use a Centime AP automation solution as an example, right? We certainly hope that you will then engage with us to learn more, but you should also know that there are wonderful other solutions out there where some of these benefits can be achieved as well, including ones that you probably already use. So please know that, yes, I'm being a shill for my own product. That's what I do. That's my job description. And that's what I'm responsible for. At the same time, it's really meant to be illustrative more than anything else.
Thanks, BC. And while you start this top 10 benefits, I do just want to let everyone know we had 100% participation on that last poll, which was great to see. So we just launched the second poll of 3 total polls.
And on this, let me preclude what some of the questions might be. It doesn't all fit on one screen, so you have to scroll down to the bottom to answer all of them and hit the submit button, which may be hidden. But it's out there, find it. And so what I'm going to do now is to go back to this presentation and then show a benefit, show the Centime solution, and then proceed from there. Please ask questions along the way. And Chris, don't be shy to, skewer me with questions that are difficult to answer.
You got it.
Okay. So number one is that, process invoices 14 times faster. Is it 13 and a half? Is it 15? Is it 10? The number is somewhere there. But the point simply is that, when today's state of the world, of course, is that, when you receive an invoice, what you're typically doing is, if you're doing it manually, you're manually entering that invoice. But a good way what does processing an invoice actually mean? It means taking in the invoice, entering the data from the invoice, coding either the invoice category as a whole or the line items, doing PO matching if you're using PO matching, or routing the invoice internally for approval to one or more people, and then posting that invoice into the general ledger as an accounts payable, right, as a liability. That's a pretty tedious step. And if you really think about all of the steps that are involved in it, every one of those steps is manual, paper-based, ad hoc, painful, difficult to follow up on. If there's anything that you would take away from this kind of session with Chris and I and Devin today, it is that, guess what? Invoice processing is less expensive and faster and less tedious. So what I'm going to show you is what you would expect to do, right? You see here a solution where, an invoice has been imported and the data from that invoice has been automatically captured, right? And then, the data has been, coded into the expenses and or items. And if necessary, you can go through an approval process, which I'll take you through, to actually route that invoice for approval prior to posting. So that whole notion of what do you do from the standpoint of invoice capture, all the way through to approval and posting is something that can and should be streamlined, and it's an immediate benefit. Make sense? Chris, be my straight man?
Yes, it makes sense.
Okay. And so that's kind of point number one. And then what I wanted to do is to then say, what else? Like reduce invoice processing costs from $20 to $5. So where does the $20 come from? Where does the $5 come from? Once again, the IOFM, there are many, many companies that have actually done time and motion studies to assess what it takes to process an invoice. By far, this is the most expensive step in AP, right? Like I said, it's the invoice data entry, it's line item coding, it's the routing and approval, it's, the back and forth with the 6 people that need to approve, it's the, things that get lost in the email, the person that's gone on vacation, it's the audit trail associated with it. All that stuff, really does take time. And nobody sits down and calculates, on a daily basis what it costs to process an invoice. But, once you do it in an automated fashion, you can never unsee that process ever again. That's really the main point, is that, you can say like, yeah, it's fine, I've got enough people, I'm doing it. But as you grow, as your volume increases, I mean, it's unconscionable that somebody would continue to do these things manually. And so, again, enough has been done in the marketplace. There are enough sort of studies that have been before and after to show that you can actually, and I'm only talking about cost reduction, right? We can talk about risk reduction, control weaknesses, and such like that. But this is one of the important points. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump in, BC, on this. And I mean, these two really go hand in hand for me, which is the speed and the cost. And again, I think probably others on the webinar are similarly finance practitioners. And when I think about the benefits of the automation, yes, faster, yes, cheaper. But the reality is we're all living in this world where the finance function is being asked to do so much more than it has historically. It's not just closing the books, producing the financial statements, running the financial operations. It's all of the strategic stuff and being the business intelligence hub and whatnot. And so the more time you can free up with your team to do things that are, I think, unequivocally not strategic, like hard coding and invoices, the more time you can free up to elevate the overall performance of the team. And so, when I think about the benefits of the digitization of finance, it's yes, you save time and money, but it's more about what you're able to do with that incremental time found that I think gets to be really compelling.
And, along the way, as the questions come up, I'm going to answer them. So Chris Russell asks the question, it would be a good idea to define AP automation. Great question. I'm going to do that, right? I think it's a really, really important and basic thing, right? I think that people have different views on what AP automation is, but I'll tell you that especially when it comes to current practice and current automation products, it consists of 2 separate but related processes that are joined at the hip, offered in one solution. What do I mean by that, right? AP processing or AP automation consists of 2 separate but related processes. First process is the process of capturing invoice processing, the process of receiving an invoice, capturing the invoice data, coding the invoice, routing it for approval, or matching it against a purchase order, and then posting it with the general ledger. That's invoice processing, right? And everybody does that. Most everybody that does not have an AP automation solution does it manually. Now, if you have 5 or 10 invoices, it might not be a big deal. When I was, doing over time, what I've realized is that somewhere around like 50 invoices per month is where it becomes really, appropriate to consider an AP automation solution, right? And modern day solutions are sort of designed so that it can be very cost effective. But in any case, that's sort of one step. Now, just because you've created and posted an invoice doesn't mean that you're going to pay it. A second related step is the actual payment of that invoice to your supplier, right? And so, I mean, typically your supplier is likely giving you payment terms, right? They're saying, pay my invoice in 30 days. Well, as soon as you post the invoice, if they've given you 30-day payment terms, you're not going to pay it. And even then, on an ongoing basis, your AP team, right, your AP staff, your controller are making daily decisions on 4 things, right? Which invoices am I going to pay? how am I going to pay it? In other words, am I going to pay using credit or am I going to pay cash? Am I going to credit line? How much am I going to pay? Am I going to short pay? Am I going to apply credits, take a discount? And the fourth is, when am I going to pay them, right? So I've got payment terms, but, given a choice between making payroll and being a supplier, guess which option you're going to choose. Those four decisions, who, when, how much, and when, are key steps in the payment processing component of AP, right? But those four steps are all based on cash and cash flow. Your decision about who, when, how much, and how are based on how much cash you have, how much you want to extend your working capital. The metric that people often use is days payables outstanding. Businesses are measured on stretching days payables outstanding and shrinking days sales outstanding so that you can have the maximum amount of working capital. I'm not a finance guy. I learned all of this from Chris. I think that, it's really important for us to just really pop up a level and say, it's not just about the process, it's also about the cash. Let me pause. Does this make sense? Chris, I hope I answered your question, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take credit for that answer because I was actually just thinking that I could probably have answered it with about 1% of the words. So let me try it a little differently, Russell, which is, the AP process starts when an invoice arrives at the business and it ends when the payment for that invoice leaves the business. And so the AP automation is the soup to nuts automation of getting that invoice to a payment and all of the intermediary workflows in the business. So,
people who are excited about learning something tend to be verbose.
Okay. So, well, your passion then is very evident. So proceed.
All right. So that is kind of benefit number two. And as Chris said, like the first and the second are related, right? Do it faster, do it cheaper. The third thing that I wanted to sort of touch on is something that, I think a lot of finance professionals really struggle with in the AP department, which is, matching invoices against purchase orders. I mean, the good news is that purchase orders are necessary and important to create controls within your purchasing process. The bad news is that very often your suppliers may not agree that may send you invoices that look very different than the way in which you send out your purchase orders. But so PO matching is necessary, useful, but also very painful. So once again, let me switch to, Santim, and I can show you really quickly what, a typical experience should be, right? So you bring in an invoice, you see all of the invoice stuff here, and the process by which a good AP automation solution should work is to basically not only match the invoices, right? So for example, you see this particular line item matches perfectly against the PO, but also provides you with highlights as to what the problems are, right? It's very common for price and quantity mismatches in POs. It's very common for sometimes, line items in the invoice not to be present on the PO, shipping, for example. And so the question, of course, is when that does happen, what actions can you take to resolve those mismatches? So being able to do all of that in one simple way is really, really important. Corollary is that if something is unlinked, but it got unlinked because the description was wrong, the quantity was wrong, whatever it is, you still want to have some simple way to be able to, link the invoices, back to the PO, right? So, here's an example of what you might do is to sort of take the invoice line items and match them up to the PO line items. And when that happens, now there's a correspondent, but as soon as the correspondence is done, the system should be able to detect things like rate and quantity mismatches. So I think that, the good news is that those of you that have implemented purchase orders obviously have implemented good controls. The bad news is that you've created this sort of PO matching problem.
Yeah. And I think actually there was a question, I think, in the Q&A that took issue with, I'll say, both of our answers to AP automation, which said, hey, doesn't it start with the PO? In my mind, it certainly can, but not every business uses POs. So, and this may be getting a little too off topic, but I mean, there is a broader umbrella that I would characterize as procure to pay, which kind of starts with the procurement process, which is go out and find a vendor. I think someone said relationship, establish a relationship with that vendor, agree to what you will do. And then that ultimately leads to an invoice. It ultimately leads to a payment. So I tend to think of procure to pay to be like the top level of the kind of the macro. And then under that, you have procurement process, and then you have the AP process. And then under the AP process, you have the invoice process and the payment process. So again, it depends on the business and where it is on that spectrum. But I think those are all valid points.
And never accuse me of being verbose again.
So that's up to you.
Okay. Well, but exactly correct. I mean, I think that, many businesses, I'll just say one other thing just to sort of support Chris's point, right? Many businesses have invoices before they implement purchasing processes. It's just the reality of it. And so you reach a certain level of maturity and you do implement a purchasing process, you do implement POs, before you go. I think that what we did a poll recently where something like 40 or 50% of businesses actually just run processes without POs, right? And so, it's important and necessary.
Yeah. And so to your point on the Centime solution, it's important to have the PO functionality in the AP umbrella because it is in that same work stream, but not every user would necessarily have the need for it based on the stats you just cited, 40 to 50% not using POs. So
sounds good. So the other thing that I'm going to go back and forth between a few different ways, but one of them is also relatively common. I wouldn't say it happens all the time, but one of the pain points that we often found when I was at my last company and here is that, we get duplicate invoices, right? I mean, duplicate invoices because I might be a day late on a payment, or I have a supplier that's very anxious, or I might even have a supplier that, has very bad processes on the AR side and sends out invoices, and it sends out duplicate invoices. But duplicate invoices are just a fact of life, right? And, ultimately they get sorted out. It's not uncommon for a business to actually make a payment against a duplicate invoice, make a duplicate payment against a duplicate invoice, but then have to deal with all of the downstream effect of that. Okay, I made a duplicate payment. My supplier told me that I made a duplicate payment. Now I'm cash out for a few days. I get a credit note, blah, 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 right? All of those things do happen, but it would be so much better if you just detected all duplicate invoices right up front. So once again, I'm going to show you what something like Centime will do. So I'm going to switch over to our live company, and I'm going to show you what some of our AP looks like today. And just prior to this, I uploaded a document, right, which was basically, what happened here? I had an invoice here that was a duplicate. Maybe somebody deleted it. But anyway, the point was that there was a duplicate. My trusty, controller person went off and deleted the invoice. But the point is that if I did upload an invoice here, which I might do here in a second to show you how it works, and in a minute or so, what will happen is that invoice will be detected as duplicate. Bonus, you'll also see how this process works. Please bear with me. I'm going to take this invoice, drop it in here. The invoice is captured. I hit continue, and you can see right now the system is actually extracting the data from that invoice. And it'll show me all of the data in a second. Sort of all of this stuff is done in real time. You can just imagine, right, the work that's involved in looking at the invoice, capturing the data manually, blah, 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 all those things. So instead of doing all that stuff, not only do I have it, captured, I also, see that it's a detected duplicate invoice. So detecting duplicate invoices is a pretty big step in this process. Jump in with questions along the way. I'm going to keep powering forward. The other thing that I think often is important to kind of highlight is the whole notion of days payables outstanding, right? Again, these numbers are representative. How do you improve working capital? Often AP is seen as a very, is a process. As I said, I got to process the invoice. I got to get it approved. My supplier is down my throat. I'm going to pay for it. But like I said, there are 4 things that you're trying to do in the AP process. Who am I going to pay? When am I going to pay? How much am I going to pay? And how am I going to pay, right? There are 2 ways you can improve working capital, right? One is to stretch your payables, make it, pay it later. And the second is to put it on a credit card, right? It's very often the case that we think about credit card as a solution for expense management. And that's true. But a lot of AP can be put on credit cards and once again, knowing that your supplier accepts a credit card. So for example, in Santeam, what we have done is we have, integrated with the Visa MasterCard supplier match system. And by integrating with the supplier match system, we know that for any incoming invoices, one of these people can, the suppliers can actually be paid by credit card. So you can see, like, we're paying Salesforce by ACH, but the Salesforce company accepts credit cards. So what I can do is to simply enroll them in my credit card program. There's a little bit of a digital engagement that takes place. They may say, you know what? Yeah, I do accept a credit card, but I accept a credit card with a payment limit, and I'll surcharge you. And that might be meaningful to you. You might say, okay, I don't mind paying a surcharge if it gives me working capital, right? If it turns out that I am paying 3% on a $10,000 invoice to give me another 30 to 60 days, it might be worth it, right? It all depends upon what your cash position is. But the point is, if you think about AP purely as a process, that's fine. But you should also think about AP as a way to extend and expand your working capital and your cash. I think a lot of, I think that's kind of a new insight, I think, that I've developed in working at Santeam. And many AP companies that provide sort of these credit card payments often will give you rewards, but no working capital. And I think that's an important element of like ensuring that your credit card functionality does that.
BC, if you don't mind, we're about halfway, but we have a few questions that are coming in about the duplicate invoice. So one is, does the duplicate invoice need to be the same invoice number in order for that to be detected?
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be. I think that, basically we look at, in our algorithm, we look at invoice number, which is of course the best way to do it, but we also identify it by, the description, the amount, the name of the supplier.
Okay, thank you. And then there's another one that's a question. Are there any features within the application for multiple companies? Commercial real estate groups commonly have parent organizations, but separate LLCs for different properties, and the invoices addressed to separate LLCs in many cases.
Yeah, so I think we do support the idea of having multiple entities. And so I think that's the question, right? Which is that I have a common team that works on multiple entities. The entity might be an HOA, it might be a franchise. I might be a McDonald's sort of franchise owner that has 30 different franchises. Each of those franchises has a different GL and a different set of invoices corresponding to it. Similarly, we see this in HOAs as well. So yeah, exactly. We do support that. And adding a company and then supporting, managing the AP for that company separately from all the others is sort of core to what we do.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you for just keep it going, right?
Yeah, we actually have another question that's, I'm sure you'll love this one. How do we differentiate from Bill.com?
I mean, look, I think there's a lot of functionality that's very common to Bill.com. But there's a number of things that I want to highlight, 2 or 3. One is that one of the key things that we are different from Bill.com is that we don't hold customers' funds. This is a big pain point. I think we've heard from customers that use Bill.com. Bill sits on your money for about 5 days. Again, there are reasons why, but the point is that they actually sit on your money and they make money on your money, right? I guess it's their prerogative. Now, if you look at their most recent filing, about 10% of their revenue comes from interest that they earn on your money. And that's not something we do, right? So for us, we really strongly believe in the benefits of the fact that, cash is important to you. And it's not our place to actually, impact your working capital and your cash flow. So we try to process the payments as quickly as possible. We use things like same-day ACH to process the payments onto the suppliers. That's probably the single biggest thing that differs where we differ from Bill.com. Does that make sense? If there are I'm sure there are many other things that we want to go into, but we don't have the time. But I just wanted to highlight that one factor. Okay, so let's keep going, right? So improve working capital. Ask for and capture 97% of early pay discounts, right? So when you, are in a position where, see, a lot of like AP at some level is about getting an invoice and then paying for it. making a payment against it, but a lot of it is also managing supplier relationships, right? I mean, in essence, what you're doing is saying that I tell me what your degrees of freedom are. Tell me that you accept a credit card and I'll pay you by credit card. Tell me that you give me early pay discounts, and I'd like to take advantage of the early pay discounts because guess what? I've got this large pile of cash that I can pay you early on. Good for you, good for me, right? But how do you broker those conversations? In Sunteam, we have a what we call a supplier portal where you can engage with your suppliers on those conversations. Do you accept a credit card? Great. Do you surcharge me? Let me know. Do you have maximums? Let me know. Do you offer early pay discounts? Great. I'm going to give you even the ability to do what we call dynamic discounting. So you can set up tiers, okay? Everybody's familiar with 210 net 30. What if it turns out that you have different terms if you're paid in 20 days as opposed to 10 days, right? This sort of notion of a sliding scale on the discount is something that's really important. So being able to ask for, engage, nurture, and capture those early pay discounts is really helpful. Somebody said cash is king. Well, guess what? This is another way in which you can sort of shore up your relationship, and also for the supplier, that is, for cash is king for them too. Plan 100% of all payments to optimize cash, right? This is what I said earlier, right? If you think about like what goes on in the AP process, at some point, what you're going to do is to decide who and when to pay, how much, and how. So once again, I'm going to sort of show you something that is sort of fairly unique to our solution and should be part of every AP automation solution, which is in a typical AP run, you're looking at your aging payables, you're looking at all of your, invoices. In our case, what we also do is to show like the fact that there's a discount available or has expired, that there's a credit available or has been applied. But very importantly, what we do is we also show you what your cash flow looks like. This is your cash forecast. And in your cash forecast, you can see the green bars correspond to AR and the red bars correspond to AP and non-AP. So if, for example, I am in a situation where I want to push this Onyx planning payment out by 30 days, I can come in here and say that I'm going to make this payment in, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to mess up my AP, but you'll get my point. But if I choose to make this payment instead of September 8th, I choose to make it on, let's say, October 8th, push it out by 30 days, then, my forecast should change. It should show me what the impact is of pushing this payment out. This is the point of cash planning, right? You do this today. You do it probably informally. Like I said, there are 4 things. Which of these invoices am I going to pay? When am I going to pay it? How much am I going to pay? And what is the mechanism that I'm going to use to pay it? All of those things have an impact on your cash. And it's really important not to just simply follow the process, but also have an understanding of how cash can be impacted in a very strategic fashion by making these AP decisions. Chris, okay? Makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to wait because I don't know which one comes next, but you're at the first part of the deck. Okay, so this is perfect. So it was like 5 through 7, or the first part of the 10 benefits. We kind of talked about the efficiency, cost savings. The next series that you just wrapped up for me are like all about the visibility that automation affords you, right? It's, people don't think of AP as potentially being strategic. And a lot of times that's because they haven't had the tools to make it strategic, right? But having this central repository where you can see everything, make informed decisions is incredibly valuable as well.
Yeah, I think Brad asks the question, how does it know about the AR side? Well, I know that today we're only focused on the accounts payable automation, but one of the, and in some ways goes back to Dolores's question about how are we different from Bill? Well, Sunteam is a unique platform in the sense that we are both AP, full-blown AP and full-blown AR in the same platform. So we connect to your general ledger, QuickBooks, NetSuite, and then not only do we provide you with the ability to look at your payables and manage the payables process, but also your receivables and full-blown capability to be able to provide reminders to customers, follow collections, and all of those things. So when we look at cash forecasting, we look at both AP and AR, as well as non-AP and non-AR items to build the forecast. Rent, payroll. These are all things that sort of obviously go into the forecast. Having that comprehensive picture is super important for both AR and AP teams to do their job. Today, we're only focused on AP, so that's why you saw the AP thing. But if you're interested, let us know. We'll show you more about how AR can be brought into the mix as well.
And BC, I mean, I did for folks on the webinar, I think that gets a little bit to the heritage and original vision of Santim was a working capital tool, right? And out of necessity, that includes both AP and AR, but as opposed to a lot of the players in the space that kind of started in one or the other and then tried to branch out, you kind of started in the center and then built in all the necessary work streams. So
yeah, cash is king, but also cash is the connective tissue, right? I mean, if you really think about like, what happens within the finance department, it's like cash is the connective tissue that binds forecasting, it binds AP, AR, credit. These are all things that are really connected together. You can certainly look at it very much from a process perspective and say AP helps me manage and reduce costs. But popping up a level, Chris, I think that, when we were doing Mineral Tree, one of the things that I realized is that CFO, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. Many CFOs don't really care much about AP because they see it as a process, which is appropriate. But if you really think about days payables outstanding, CFOs do care about AP and should care about AP. So popping up a level to say like AP is about cash is sort of super important and working capital.
And it's more controllable than AR in other areas, right? So when you look at sectors that you have the most control over, AP is at the top of that list. So,
yep. So earning cash back on spend, right? This is the other side of using a credit card, obviously. I think that for smaller companies, it might not be as meaningful, but being able to drive payments onto credit cards, what some people call virtual cards, not only gives you, I intentionally wanted to prioritize the working capital benefit of a credit card over cashback, right? Cashback is great. Rebates are wonderful. But you know what? If you were to compare 30 days of cash extension versus, 100 basis points in rebates, obviously working capital and cash extension are hugely more important than, than the rebates that you get. But rebates are not to be minimized. They're important. But the more payments you drive onto your AP spend, onto cards, the better it is. At minimum, what we'll find is that, this cash back that you get on your AP spend can subsidize the cost of your AP solution. It might not turn you into a profit center, but certainly what it does is it sort of helps you with, offsetting some of the costs that you have on your AP side. Reduce check payments, right? I mean, I can't imagine that people love checks. They are, the good news is that they're ubiquitous, right? Everybody accepts a check. You don't need to know too much about your supplier in order to send them a payment by check. But it's also the case that check payments are the single biggest form of fraud today in payments. Checks get lost. I think I saw a statistic that something like 8% of all checks are lost by the US Postal Service. That's a pretty big number. And, with 8% across a very large volume, you might not be affected individually, but, more often than not, sometime in your tenure as an AP professional, you're going to be dealing with the fact that checks do get lost in the mail. But being able to reduce check payments is not just saying I'm going to move to electronic payments. It is about that supplier portal that I told you about. Being able to engage your suppliers, giving them the ability to securely enter their payment information, and then being able to send payments directly by direct deposit, but very importantly, to be able to send them proper remittance detail. And again, that one of the more frequent questions that you will get from your suppliers, where's my payment and where's the remittance? And if you can sort of simplify that, it's really important. So the headline is reduce check payments, but the subtext is ensure that you have the capabilities in the system to ensure that, all of the other things that come from reducing check payments are properly addressed. And then finally, last but not least, as they say, everybody talks about fraud. I've learned that very few people experience it, but eventually they do. They may not be victimized by it, but they're often exposed to it in some way, shape, or form. Not a day goes by when somebody in my company says, "Hey, listen, I heard that you want me to buy some gift certificates at the local CVS. I'm really busy. Do you want me to do this right now? Well, guess what? We're constantly being attacked by fraudsters. The simple thing that I wanted to say is that, for us, fraud reduction is a cost. For them, it's a revenue line. They're obviously going to invest much more in a revenue generating operation than in a cost reduction operation. So it's incessant. We have to deal with it. But what I found is that, over the years, you can have, things like, segregation of duties and signatures and so forth on checks more easily. But the moment you start to sort of increase your payment mix from check and ACH and so on and so forth, you start to realize that you have different processes around the controls. So by consolidating all of those different payment methods into one umbrella, and then using the payment controls in a consistent way, can really help mitigate the risk that you have associated with payment fraud. But the point is that it's not just the payment fraud. If you look at it from end to end, all the way from invoice capture, invoice processing, that is going through you're going to post an invoice to the general ledger and make it a liability. Well, which invoice are you going to post? How do you know it's a legitimate invoice? How do you know that it's not a fake invoice, right? These are controls that actually are inherent in the solution right from the get-go. And so it's really, really important that we have we understand the fraud control benefits of an AP solution. Very quickly, let me show you an example of what happens. How on the payable side, policies can be established. These are invoice approval policies, where you can specify who is supposed to invoice who is supposed to approve an invoice. And similarly, what you have are payment approval policies, first approval, second approval, third approval, based on different tiers of approval. So that's kind of a quick run through and a quick summary. Just wanted to, hopefully this is all intuitive and non-controversial. But there's so much more to cover here, but I wanted to sort of hit on the 7 or 8 or 9, 10 points that actually have very tangible benefits that I think hopefully you relate to. Let me shut up and sort of stop here.
Thanks, BC. And we did have a question at the very beginning. And I think in case for anyone, just to have a concept of everything that you've just walked through, how would you define AP automation in general, just to have a baseline understanding?
I think we hit that one, no?
Yeah, we did.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
What else we got?
We have another one. So in bill.com, some frustration about not seeing mapping for historical bills in one report. And there just doesn't seem a good way to make adjustments for mapping. Does Santeam have this capability?
I think that, may I ask that you please get in touch with us? I don't think I understand the question very well. So maybe please drop us a note so we can properly answer it for you.
All right, I'm trying to see if there's any other questions that were coming in. And I'm also just going to launch this final poll while we have everyone.
Can I ask BC a question?
Of course, Chris.
All right, BC. A lot of talk about AI, and apparently you did a webinar without me yesterday on AI. This notion of straight through processing and AP automation, will there ever be a day where a company can get an invoice, have it validated correctly, approved, payment out the door without any human intervention?
It can be done today, Chris. And, I think if you think about it, right, I think let's talk about what's possible and whether it's appropriate. Those are two different things.
That was my next question. Okay, good. Okay, it can be done. Should it be done? So go.
Yeah, should it be done is the question,
share
right?
My view.
Yeah. So and it largely depends upon a lot of it is sort of keen on volumes. Today what you can do in many systems, including in Santeam, is to say I'm going to bring in an invoice, have it automatically captured, have it automatically coded, have it automatically posted, and automatically paid. That all of that can be done, right? And if you have like, 100,000 invoices that you're processing, and and you just don't have the resources, the time, effort, even with all the automation to review each one manually, you might want to implement a solution like that. And but the point, of course, is that you're also at risk of violating every control known to mankind, right? You can have like fake invoices come in, you can have payments in small dollars go out, and before you know it, there's some wise guy fraudster that's going to come in and clean out your bank account.
Yeah.
And that's really the crux of it. I think it's unwise to do, in my opinion, but it can be done.
Okay. So much to the relief of all of us finance folks out there, you see a future for our jobs despite all of the AI out there.
I'm sorry, ask a question. I missed the first part of what you said.
I said, much to our relief, as all the finance professionals on the call, you see a future for our jobs despite AI.
Of course. I mean, I think that, look, I think let's put it into context here. AI has been around for 75 years. Alan Turing is a preeminent computer scientist, coined the term the Turing test back in 1950. And the Turing test, his definition of the Turing test was, if a computer can trick me as a human being in believing that the computer is a human, then it is deemed to have intelligence. Okay, it took another 60 years. It wasn't until like 2015 or so that computers were actually able to pass the Turing test. But what I think has happened over the years is that sort of the basic notion of AI has been used in a number of areas. Today, we use it in trading, we do it in invoice capture, we do it in a number of areas. We do it in reporting, in a number of areas where sort of AI is being used to do things more effectively, to do it in a less error-prone manner, to do it faster, right? What I think is important to recognize is that since November of last year, when ChatGPT took the world by storm, and since basically Sony introduced Aibo, in the late 90s, has been the increasing consumerization of AI. And now what we're seeing is this whole new form of AI, which is called generative AI, which people are excited about. You and I can interact with it. You and I can ask sort of questions and not really kind of realize that, unless you're told otherwise, that, this is actually a computer that's answering the question. But the fact of the matter is that, the ChatGPT is trained on a domain that is very general purpose. It is not trained in a highly specific domain. It's not trained on IntelliCare's business, and therefore it cannot answer detailed questions about IntelliCare's business, or what's the future of healthcare and the future of nursing, or what the financial models need to be as it relates to nursing, right? These are things that, ChatGPT cannot do. So the point is, I think there's a sort of interesting relationship between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence doesn't exist without human intelligence. There's always going to be productivity benefits from the use of computers. AI is one way in which we use computers. I don't think that, we should be worried about like losing our jobs because a computer can do our job better. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, we should be worried at all times about like not being productive. But, the fact is that some things come and some things go. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, so I agree. I mean, you said just because the computer can do the job better. I mean, I think what you said leading up to that is that the computer can't actually do this job to the standard it needs to be done with the controls that will produce acceptable financial statements, all of the like. So again, not going back 75 years, but even some of the rules-based machine learning that has promoted the invoice automation part of AP has been around for several years and creates efficiency, but it doesn't mean that someone doesn't need to validate that invoice and make sure that it's being captured correctly and the like. So I tend to agree, even though I hear all of the bluster about AI and the impact it's going to have on back office type roles. So
I think that, financial operations and AP in particular, people have questions all the time about how to do something. And those that are experienced know how to do it. But those that are sort of coming up and learning more have one of two choices. They can go and ask somebody that has done it before, or in this day and age, I'm telling you, it's interesting to go and ask something like ChatGPT how to do it, right? I mean, there's no harm in trying and asking the question. It's out there, it's there for you to use. It's at least today free, and you don't have to trust it, but at least you can get an opinion.
Yeah, totally.
So there are a couple of other sort of clarifications, it seems like, to the questions. So again, Chris, does it sync the PDF image of the bill back to the GL? Yes, it does. We do that. And then as far as the chart of accounts is concerned, we do match the, we do match the, we do code based on prior coding. Yeah, the first time, basically, you may need to sort of specify it, but the subsequent invoices are coded based on past sort of knowledge. So there's a PO question. Again, it's above my pay grade. I'm not the PO matching expert. So Robert, again, please be in touch. We'll get you more details on how PO matching works.
All right. Appreciate everyone asking their questions in the chat and the Q&A. I think that rounds out all the questions that we have for those. Dolores, Robert, I think we'll reach out to you offline. But let's share. We do have an offer for you all. So if you would like to schedule a demo with Sonteam, we are offering some goodies in our Sonteam shop up until September 8th. So if you would like to book with us, you can get a Yeti cup. I know Chris is checking out that foot massage right now. So lots of treats there. If you just go to Sonteam/demo, you can reach out to us there. Chris, BC, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to marketing@sonteam.com as well.
Hey, Devin, did you get the final poll answered?
I think we did. I'll end that final poll, but it looks like we had 100% participation. So I think this has been our most successful webinar yet in terms of poll participation.
All right, good stuff. Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate it, and thank you for joining. Thanks again, Chris. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yes, please.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Devin.
Bye.